Hello, this is Toby. First things first, the good news, this is the 100th episode of the Science for Policy podcast. I'm really quite happy about this. When we started making episodes back in 2020, my original plan, at least the one I admitted to colleagues, was that we'd make a series of 6 episodes and see how it went. I don't mind admitting now that in my head I did hope to continue beyond that if there was enough of an audience, basically, if people found it interesting. Well, indeed, there was enough interest, and here we are about 4 years later with episode 100. So, hurrah! Apart from anything else, this is a good moment to take stock of where we've got to, and in particular to say a big thank you to all the people who've made it possible. You only normally hear me and the guests on each episode, but of course behind that, well, first of all, there are many guests, a lot more than 100 actually, because many episodes have 2 or 3 guests in conversation. So I do want to thank everyone who's been game enough to come and talk to me. And also my patient colleagues in the scientific advice mechanism, and in particular my 2 communications colleagues, Ala and Nina, for their editing skills. And last but not least, our great and very enthusiastic audience. I know the Science for Policy community is quite niche, but in that niche community, we have now managed to get a pretty good penetration for the podcast, by which I mean a lot of people are listening to it. And that's thanks, I think, in large part to existing listeners being evangelical and spreading the word among their friends and colleagues, as well as sticking by us themselves, episode after episode. Another interesting fact is that our audience is now much more global than it was when we started. We are based here in Europe, but only about half of our listeners come from Europe. The other half are spread all over the world. So that's all great. And then, for the 100th episode, I wanted to do something a bit different, and you are about to hear the result. We got together a big group of people, a live audience at the University in Helsinki, and we recorded a live episode with a rather different format, as you'll hear. We had a lot of fun, but here comes the bad news. The main audio recording setup which we had in the room did not work. Or rather, it worked kind of, but the quality was so terrible, in the end we just couldn't use it. I had to bin it. Now, perhaps luckily, we were aware that this was a possibility, and so we had a bunch of different backup recording devices scattered around the room, like laptops and phones and so on. And they all worked. So the result then is not studio quality sound, to put it mildly. What I've had to do, and it's been a real pain, is to try and reconstruct the entire recording from a combination of all those different backup sources. So we do have the entire recording. Here it is, and you can listen to it end to end. But the quality is extremely variable. Basically, we had a big crowd of people contributing, as you can hear, and some were standing close to the microphones, and some were standing far away, and some moved around, and some people dropped objects at various points. And I mean, the room was fairly acoustically well set up, but it was a university classroom in the centre of a city, so we also had occasionally some random noise from outside. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. The long and short of it is, this is not a particularly easy listen. It's not the smooth, clear audio that you might be used to from other episodes of this podcast and indeed from other podcasts. I have done my best to match the levels of different speakers and to take out the background noise and to enhance the speech and so on, but it is very mixed. Sometimes you can clearly hear what's being said. Sometimes you have to really kind of squint, or whatever the ear equivalent to squinting is, and concentrate. And I want to apologise for that. In a way, it's a real shame because, as I said, this was a lot of fun with the live audience, and it was supposed to be, I guess it still was, our kind of triumphant centenary episode. Actually, maybe centenary means 100 years, so forget that. Our 100th episode, anyway. So look, have a listen, enjoy it. Enjoy some of the very interesting discussion that we have with our audience. But if you find some parts of it just a slog and no fun to listen to because of the audio quality, I understand and I apologise, and your podcast software will have a fast forward button for exactly this purpose. So if there's some bits that you really can't make out, skip on 30 seconds or so and you'll find the next part is probably easier. And do come back for episode 101 in 2 weeks, which is going to be something of a treat too. I have a very silly idea for that. And what's more, I'll make sure to record it with the usual nice crystal clear audio. Anyway, enough excuses from me. Here comes our 100th episode recorded with a live audience in Helsinki, Finland. See you on the other side. Hello. welcome to the 100th episode of the Science for Policy podcast. We are at the University of Helsinki in Finland, hosted by the Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress. My name, as ever, is Toby, and I'm joined this morning in this beautiful sunny room where we've closed all the curtains by
Anna, Alex,
Maggie, Emma,
Eva, Torsten,
Lale, Hannah,
Cricket, Janet, Bridget, Joanna, Linda, Laura,
Julian,
Carolina, Lisa, Minna,
and Martin.
Yeah! We only practiced that once, can you believe it? And if you're joining online or listening to this audio later, you'll at least be able to understand what's going on if I explain it as follows. For episode 100 of our podcast, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and when the nice people at SRI Congress invited me to make a live recording, I pretty much bit their hand off, but having decided I wanted to do something, quote unquote, a bit different, it seemed a bit lame to just get a panel of guests and stick them on the stage and ask them even questions. So I figured we should really have some kind of discussion with a whole crowd. And then I had this idea that I would collect basically the most difficult, annoying questions about science for policy from the last 99 episodes and stick them up on big screens. These are the ones where the guests haven't been able to agree, or they've had different opinions, or they've just found it very puzzling and confusing, and then throw those at people who don't know anything about what's coming to hit them and get some kind of argument going. And then I started to get nervous because I shared this idea with various people, and one of them, a very wise Finnish lady who I know is listening to this, and you know who you are, said this isn't going to work. You know, if you've got a room full of Finns, they're not going to cheer and shout and stamp their feet. They're just going to quietly nod and look thoughtful and make intelligent contributions, which is lovely, but it's also boring. Podcasting is an audio medium, so since then I've been in panic mode, and everyone I meet who knows anything about moderating groups, I've been asking them how on earth I can make a live podcast where people actually make some noise. And I've had various answers like play warm-up games, give out bribes, invite lots of Americans. The most popular one is just serve alcohol on the door, but it's currently 20 past 11 in Helsinki, and I think you can hear that's probably a bit much. The most inspired session was from one Maggie Dugan, who's here in the room today, and she said, give them something noisy to shake. As that happens, I have a cupboard at home full of percussion instruments, don't ask why. So joining us here, also in the room, we have some shakers, some bells, we have a duck, we have a wood pigeon, we have a frog, and we have the noble vibra-slap. Google it if you don't know what that looks like, because it's a pretty weird thing. And I jingled and rattled my way through airport security for this, so please go with me. Here's the plan. I'm going to read out some questions. The people in the room are going to stand up and they're going to walk or run or leap or dive over to the table full of percussion instruments here, and they're going to grab a percussion instrument that represents their answer to the question. So we have the questions on a big screen. I will also read them out for the audience at home and put the list in the show notes. And next to the questions on the screen, there'll be a little key saying, if you agree, shake a shaker. If you disagree, ring a bell, or whatever it happens to be. And so the idea is that even if you're not here in the room right now, you will know what the people in the room think because you'll hear how much noise they make and what kind of noise. And then, if that's not fun enough, we'll also have some discussion about why we said those things. I'll repeat again, you don't have to know the answer. I chose the questions because in general, people who work in this space don't know, or don't agree at least. And in particular, because in the last 99 episodes, we've had several conflicting opinions on exactly these questions. I have some warm-up questions. Stand up, please, ladies and gentlemen. Warm-up question, the first. We should get rid of daylight saving time. This is the thing where, you know, countries put their times back by an hour or forward by an hour in winter and in spring in order to try and change the times when we have daylight and we don't have daylight. What do you think? So if you agree, you're going to ring the bell in a second. If you disagree, you're going to shake the shaker. And if you have something to contribute, you're going to make another noise like a frog noise or a duck noise, whatever. Go! Okay, cool. I hear some bells. Why are you going to do it?
So I love sleeping, and actually daylight saving is interrupting my sleep, and it's not saving energy as far as I know.
Okay, very good. And who's going to shake it? I heard a shaker or two. Julian.
Because I live in Hamburg and it's dark and in the winter, and sometimes I'm getting an hour more, and then I have more sunlight in the morning.
Another shaker? Yeah, Torsten.
I don't get the argument that this 1 hour shift kind of messes up with people's system because I flew to Helsinki, and there's already a 1 hour shift. So we're doing this all the time. So this daylight saving should be a big issue.
Even if we all do it at the same time, because that's the thing, right? It's not just you flying from A to B; it's the whole country changing its routine.
We've been doing these choices deliberately all the time. So those people arguing against daylight saving, I hope they never fly across time zones.
And I heard a croaking frog. Peter.
Yes, a croaking frog. I partly agree that we can get rid of it, but I want to retain my light evenings. Maybe that's opposite to what Martin said. He wants his light mornings. I don't care about mornings. I'm sleeping in the morning. But those light evenings are important for socializing.
This makes sense. I mean, this doesn't mean that we can't do daylight saving. It means we should each individually do our own, right? You can choose whether you want to work on the schedule of sleeping in the morning or staying up in the evening.
Depending on your office hours and all.
Yeah, okay. Excellent, thank you. Good. So, okay, we have 2 more warm-up questions. If you'd like to return the instruments, and although it's great that you're all standing up, don't really have to stand up for the entire recording. We might be here for an hour or so. You can sit down when you'd like to, as long as you can come and get the instruments. All right. Question 2. This is one that's hard to do in audio, but I will try to explain it. If a dog was to wear trousers, that's pants for the North Americans, how would it do so? Would it put the trousers on its bottom half as it's walking along on 4 legs, so that all its legs are in the trousers, right? Top half no trousers, bottom half trousers. Or would it put the trousers on its back half, on its hind legs, so like the back 2 legs are in trousers and the front 2 legs are like arms, right? That's the question. And if you have some sophisticated third answer, I'd love to hear it. Go grab your instrument. Wow, people move fast for that one. All right, 3, 2, 1. I hear a lot of shakers and not a lot of bells. Someone shakery. Lisa, shake it.
So I think a dog would wear trousers just on the bottom half, because if you look at like evolution, like a lot of animals then became erect, like us as humans maybe, and so we wear pants on just the bottom half, so that's how I think dogs would wear it.
And that might happen with dogs, and we should be ready. Is that the idea?
Probably, yeah.
Because what if they suddenly want to stand up and then they've got trousers on their legs? That would be really hard.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'd imagine a dog if it was bipedal. Nobody wears pants on their arms. So that's exactly how I imagine.
That's a big if. Well, you have 1 set of bells. I think you're the only set of bells in the room, so tell us why you have bells.
I have a dog, and the reason I would like her to have pants would be because of the mud and water,
Yes.
and to have them in back and front legs,
Yeah.
would be helpful. And there's no help from only having pants in the back.
Right. Yeah. That makes some sense. And then we have we have a vibroslap. I have Emma, vibroslap. Tell us why you had the vibroslap.
1, I want to try it.
Yeah.
2, a dog should not wear trousers.
I like rejecting the premise. I love it. Great. And we have a frog over here.
Well, I had to answer. One was dogs shouldn't wear trousers.
Okay.
The other one is it should be on the front, because dogs can't take off the pants until they want to pee poop.
So it should be on the front.
Yeah. Just because you can just actually, they can release themselves without having to.
I like it. Amazing. Okay, good. Thank you. That was one question 2. We have 1 more warm-up question. Thank you for doing the slides. If you're putting on your socks and your shoes, I mean, at the same time, right? In which order do you put them on? Do you go sock, sock, and then shoe, shoe? So if so, then you ring a bell. Or do you go sock, and then shoe, and then sock, and then shoe? If so, shake a shaker. And if you have a third answer, then you're welcome to contribute a frog or a duck or a pigeon. Go. All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, I hear a lot of bells. The bells are the 2 socks and then 2 shoes. Do you want to make a comprehensive argument, Antti?
Yeah, well, in Finland, we are civilized people who don't wear our shoes inside. So the first thing I get up from the bed, I put on my socks. I will use my shoes later on when I go outside.
Great. I see bells, I see more bells. I see a vibroslap. Martin.
Yeah. I was waiting a little bit and thinking about it, because I think it's depending. I also have those indoor slippers, and there I do socks, shoes. But when I go outside or I'm changing my shoes, for example, when I'm going out, for trail or something, then often floor like muddy or wet, and then I do socks, shoes to stand on one foot, and put on socks, shoes on the other foot to not get my socks dirty or wet. That's depending on the environment.
That's a very persuasive argument. Could you give me a little cheer now if you agree with Martin and say it depends on context? Best contribution of the day, Barnum. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd like to return your instruments to the central table, we will get on to the 10 questions that I've pulled out of our podcast episode so far. And here is question 1. So I'd say take your time, take a moment or two. I'll read out the question. I'll explain the answers, so they're not very complicated, and then I'll maybe give a comment or two about why this might arise while you are grabbing your instruments. So here's the question. Science advice organizations should welcome researchers who have connections to industry or to campaign groups. Okay, feel free to stand up from your chair whenever you'd like to, come and grab an instrument, shake it, or whatever. The idea here is, so for an example, from my work, from the work of the Scientific Advice Mechanism at the European Commission, we've done reports on things like sustainable food consumption, sustainable food systems, and there's a lot of lobbies in those areas. So there's the environmental lobby, there's the health lobby, there's also food manufacturers, food packagers, there's agriculture, there's heavy industry, and so on and so on and so on. And these people all have contributions to make to the general debate. And the question here is like, how much science advice should try to incorporate those perspectives? That's so if you agree that science advice organizations should welcome research with connections to industry or campaign groups, you're going to ring a bell. If you disagree, you're going to shake a shaker. And if you have some more complicated answer than yes or no, you're going to make a strange noise. Okay, 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome to the duck. Someone with a bell. Janet, you have bells. You agree?
I do agree.
Tell us why.
I think it's because we need to have broad contributions to our solutions. I mean, if we don't have more organizations involved, we end up having some groupthink, and we don't necessarily get other ideas. And we need to take ideas from them and share our ideas to them as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Somebody who shook a shaker, do I see a shaker? I don't see any shakers. Interesting, but I see quite a few sophisticated animals. So Connie, you have the Viper Slap.
I do have the Viper Slap. I also wanted to try it out, but I do have something to say about this. I do wholeheartedly not only agree with this statement, but I also think that science advice organizations should welcome researchers who have connections to industry, campaign groups, and community. And that is the whole theme of some of the stuff we're doing here at SRI is transdisciplinary. I work at the Institute for Transdisciplinary at the University of Calgary, and I wholeheartedly think that transdisciplinary is one of the most important things in science research.
Excellent, thank you. There was a, did I hear a duck? Maggie, you had the duck.
The duck.
Why do you have the duck?
Well, I agree, and I think there needs to be a real caution about balancing those voices, having some sort of a detector, if you will, to make sure that it's not overwhelming. And maybe it's a facilitated discussion. It's not just take it and okay and incorporate it, but a facilitated discussion where you're looking at a lot of different voices and then among them finding the consensus. That's consensus based on fact.
Thank you. And Peter, you're holding the frog.
Yes.
Again.
Much the same as Maggie. I agree that those voices should be heard in the science advice debate, say the fact finding, but the science advice organization needs to be very careful to filter the messages coming from those and essentially stick to the science. Of course, science is very broad, social science and so on, but that has to be a strong filter.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. This is the reason that I think the question is interesting, and from what I remember about discussions in the past, basically nearly everyone can agree that these various groups, these various stakeholders have a role to play in policymaking, in representing their own interests and those of their communities and those of the people that fund them and so on. The question is whether this belongs in scientific advice, I think is the question we should answer, right? So Peter, you were saying, well, we need to be very careful to balance it. And Maggie, you also mentioned it has to be based on facts, right? Based on knowledge. It can't just be a place where all the lobbies come together. The question is whether that's scientists' job to do, or in particular science advisors' job to do. Lala, yes.
Yeah, I just think you need to also define connections, because as people who work in university doing research, a lot of us have connections to industry.
Yes.
And then also industry and campaign groups can be very different things. So it could be that industry actually is trying to get, better at science and at sustainability, but then another campaign group could be also that, or could be campaigning for oil sands or whatever it is. So I think it is just sort of like depending on the context and what is the meaning of connections.
Linda, hello.
Hello. I agree, and I think the issue more there would be that it's not transparent. So I think we should welcome, but we need to have or be transparent about what those connections are, and exactly what you said, like kind of communicate them openly when participating in science advice. So I think that's the key.
Yeah, makes sense. Any other thoughts? I mean, I also have a thought. I might have grabbed for a shaker for this one, I think. And the reason for that is that if you ask this question to policymakers, they would give you a very different answer. And we do ask this question to policymakers, and they say, no, what we want from you is specifically evidence-based factual contributions from scientific consensus from society. We don't want you to be the filter for all these other influences. We have those. We have intelligent and sophisticated ways to integrate those also into the democratic process at all kinds of levels. But your contribution as science advisors is to give us just the science. And they have got well-designed systems which are supposed to kind of do this balancing that we were talking about, Torsten and Peter and Maggie, balancing the different voices in a democratically respectable way. And that's not something that science advisors should take on themselves. This is what we're often told by policymakers in that discussion. Any thoughts about that for people who are jingling bells enthusiastically? All right, Martin?
So I had no well, but I think you're right. So as scientists or as researchers, it is important to also have connections to the industry. But as science advisors, I think that you have to make clear what's your job. And it's not doing science, but transferring science to policy. So I think that's a different job there.
And do you think it implies a different level of acceptability connection to it?
I think it's okay if you are transparent about the agenda, and as said before. So I think it's okay-ish, but I think science advice organizations should keep that in mind and be very cautious. If people have a strong connection to industry or campaigning groups and have like an agenda, even maybe a hidden agenda, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Let's see what behind Carolina, hello.
I think I'm from Brazil, and in some countries there's not plenty of access to research or peer research. So companies can be research funders. And I also think that there is a perspective that anyone who has a connection to industry or campaign groups is evil. And it's not the case. Sometimes a researcher who works a lot in their area and saw the benefit of something and did more than going, did what research funders are actually asking researchers to do, which is engage with the community, engage with society, and sometimes engage with the industry. So I think that it's kind of only for countries where you have enough jobs that one person can do just science, the other can do science and advice, but in many realities, it's just the one person who gets funding from the industry, who does fund campaign, and also advice for science.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it's not just different countries and contexts, it's also different fields of expertise, right? I mean, we've recently been working on artificial intelligence. It's very hard, it turns out, to find an expert in AI who isn't linked to industry. I mean, they're basically everywhere, even in Europe. Yeah, Auntie.
Yeah, I was basically going to say something like you just said. So that if we would decide that we would not include researchers or connections to industry, we would crop out a lot of potential knowledge. But then again, as Linda said, it has to be transparent, so people then know that okay, this guy was funded by Google, so let's take that into account.
Yeah. So transparency.
as scientists, it's very arrogant of us to think that we are just doing science. Because every time we do science, our values, our culture, and the system we do that science in is sort of reflected on what we do. So anything we do is based on the values we hold. And that's a case for having more diverse and inclusive teams, that people can bring in different values and contribute to different aspects of it. Now, I think wholeheartedly agree with Peter that there has to be a balance. You can't just have one aspect of this. But maybe the science I make will be very different from the science you make because I have a different worldview and I have different values. And so if we just say like, no, we can't do this because based on whatever arbitrary line, then we're doing bad science.
Very good. This question of values is going to come up again and again. I think we'll move on to question 2 at this point. As a science advisor, I'm okay with my research being used by everyone in the policy-making process. If you agree, you're going to ring a bell. If you disagree, you're going to shake a shaker. And if you're more sophisticated than that, you're going to grab a more sophisticated animal like a frog. I think here, just worth mentioning a couple of examples of the kinds of people who might be implicated here. In sustainability, it's people like the environmental lobby. In other areas of science, it might be, for instance, your research being taken up and used by the tobacco industry, by nuclear power industry, by nuclear weapons lobby, by different political parties, including those who might have different opinions from the ones that you personally hold. Or, for instance, during COVID, or indeed in general public health issues, when we have debates about vaccination and so on. Every group is looking out for some science that they can grab onto and say, look, this is what we've always been saying. How do you, as a science advisor, as someone whose job it is to put evidence into policymaking and into public, feel about that happening? Okay, so those who agree are going to ring bells, those who disagree are going to shake shakers, and those who have something more complicated to say are going to play something more complicated. 3, 2, 1. We have bells, and we have some complicated instruments. Okay, Adam, yeah, you rang a bell. Why do you agree with this?
So as a scientist, and I do a lot of science policy interface research, I still believe that when I'm making science, it should be accessible to everyone, and everyone should be able to use it. And when I'm formulating my conclusions, I should make the message clear that I want to communicate to the audience. And if someone is going to use it, they might have other intentions, but it would be difficult for them if my intentions and message is really clear and difficult to misinterpret.
Okay, yeah, so you can kind of protect yourself from the bad effects by through clarity of communication. Very good. Did you have bells?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, tell us why you had bells.
Well, I'd like people to poke holes in my science. So if everybody's using it, there's more holes, so then I can know how to fill them better.
Okay, so like extended scientific method, extended peer review.
Exactly.
Excellent. Peter and Emma, I think you both had instruments other than bells or shakers. Emma, why?
Well, I'm basically in the middle of the two of you, but it kind of touches on the last question, which is I think you have to be cautious, but you also have to be okay in the way that communication works now and that information is disseminated in communities and populations, that everyone will have a chance to use your research. And as a result, having those communities, even if they are potential lobbyists, in the design process of how you advise people, you're communicating to policymakers, knowing that those policymakers could end up giving people information that they could use for harm or for good. So I think you have to be okay with it.
Get used to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But as a result, you have to talk to people to have a better understanding of how that could be used, so you can communicate better to those communities.
Great. Peter, do you want to add something?
I mostly agree, but there's some nuances. One of which is I would not like my research to be cherry-picked. Any counter-arguments that might be equally valid, dismissed, and so the lobbyists taking hold of what I'm saying and running with it. Yeah. And you can also think of cases where that information that I provide might be misused, twisted, distorted. It's a kind of use. Misuse is a kind of use. But, but you have no control over that one. you've given your message, you take the light of the phone.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. I mean, so this idea of like political weaponization is a big issue, right? So just another anecdote then from a report we did a few years ago on microplastics pollution, where the report, basically the question for the report was like, are microplastics a threat to human health or to the health of the environment in their current state? And the report gave an answer which I, as a communications person, was quite scared of. I just thought, like, nobody's going to like this, everyone's going to hate it, because the answer was basically, there's no evidence right now that microplastics pollution is a threat to human health or to the environment. And actually, there's a good amount of evidence that the threat is not materializing. However, A, there isn't enough evidence, and B, it looks like if pollution continues at the current rate, in 10 years or so, we will have a serious problem. So this is one of these messages where, as a science communication bill, you just think, like, oh, Christ, it's not going to happen. Everyone's going to hate it. What actually happened was exactly the opposite. The environmental lobby all welcomed it because they're like, look, see, we were telling you this whole time, 10 years and we're completely shafted. This is terrible. But the plastic packaging industry also loved it because they said, look, we can tell you that, look, there's not enough evidence. We need to sit tight and do more research. In the meantime, there's no reason to panic and stop doing all the stuff we need to do. So everyone was kind of holding up the science and cheering about it. And the scientists in the middle were a bit nonplussed. Like, well, but neither of those things is what we said. It happens. Has anybody else had that kind of experience? Or Torsten, you were going to... Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I mean, sometimes scientific results are not that black and white, and that's just what you try to communicate there.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, of course, we don't like the abuse of scientific results, but what's the alternative? You know, secret advice or something, or transparency or so, selected advice. So I don't see what we can do other than trying to be as clear as possible, as unambiguous as possible with the messaging.
You guys are great. Okay, so you keep giving me great segues into future questions. Okay, so I'm going to move on. But is it possible? Yeah, could we go on to question 8? Can you flick until you find question 8? Ah, secret advice. This is something I've talked about a few times on the podcast. I mean, not me. I've asked about. So question 8 says as follows. As a science advisor, it's okay to have private conversations with a policymaker. The idea here is, like, you go behind closed doors and you have the one-to-one conversation or whatever, without there being transparency about what's said on your side. I'm not going to lead you more than that. I just want to leave it there and see what you think. So if you agree, private conversations are okay. Sometimes you ring the bell. If you disagree that they're okay, you shake the shaker. And again, the usual third option. All happy? 3, 2, 1. Bells, a frog, and a Viagra slap. Let's go straight for the Viagra slap. Linda, how come you're not happy with either agreeing or disagreeing?
Well, I think, like, kind of how I understand the agreeing part. So I think it's really important that researchers and policymakers also build relations, and that relations building could happen through private conversations, and that kind of help to make the science advice or that relationship long term and kind of, build that trust through private conversations. So I think that's why I agree. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, I disagree because I think in science advice, it's really important to have that transparency in how the advice is done, what kind of, in what sort of policy process there was scientific advice. So that's why I'm like a bit on the fence. I see the good sides, but I also see the dangers of kind of building this non-transparent science advice. So I think that's...
Okay, yeah. Excellent. We have a couple of bell rings over here. Julia and Martin. Julia, yeah. Why do you ring a bell?
So I think Linda said some right buzzwords, I would say. Like trustfulness is important for the process of political advice and building long-term relationships. So I think, you have to have from time to time a private conversation to create this trust between science advisor and policymaker. Mm-hmm. So, I would agree.
Very good. Yeah, anything to add, Martin?
Yeah, so I'm totally online with that. Industry is doing that too. I would wish that in policy making that we have complete transparency, but we don't. And so I think it's okay as a scientist to also have private conversations with policymakers. And a part of that, I'm a scientist, yes, but you also know policymakers in private settings, maybe it's also familiar in family settings, and so I think it's okay to also talk about science during those gatherings and not strip it out.
Great. And Maggie, I forget what instrument you had. Did you frog or you vibrate? You frogged. Okay.
So very much as my colleague said here, I think if the purpose is to educate the policymaker, they might be more comfortable learning in private and not losing the intellectual vanity of not understanding something. So
yes,
it would be interesting to be able to have those kinds of those conversations privately, and yet otherwise, I do believe it should be transparent.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, Johanna.
Thank you. As a knowledge worker who used to work in politics as a political advisor, I think that having confidential discussions with researchers is very important for the politicians, because they are always like in front of me, they are on everywhere, and to ask, I would say not stupid, but those questions that politicians cannot ask while media is present are very important. So I think that's a good way for the researcher or science advisor to have a relationship on those bonds.
Yeah. I think so. We're hearing similar themes, right? Lisa, yeah, in 1 second. I just want to put the opposite case, though, as strongly as I can, and then we can continue arguing with it. What about the democracy argument, which goes something like, the way our system works is that we have to be able to hold our leaders accountable. And to do that, we have to be able to find out what inputs they've had so that we can assess their judgment. And it's no use for policymakers to be able to protect themselves from that kind of scrutiny by having private inputs and then making public announcements where we don't know, or we just have to take it on faith what the inputs were. Okay, I'm just joking that in. Yeah, Lisa. Hi.
Actually, my response kind of builds on that. Good. Like is around that theme. I agree with what everyone says. Like I'm a bit on the fence for both sides, but I think it becomes about power and balance, because if you are the only like scientific advisor talking to the only politician about a certain theme or topic, and then you, depending on your values or motivations, become like this big-headed like person who's like, oh, I'm going to advise a policymaker and they can do what I'd rather or do what they want, then that becomes like problematic. So I think it just needs to be, again, about this transparency, but also balance and inclusivity and diversity. So it's our responsibilities as scientists to be open, and also if you make those relationships with policymakers, then to also maybe have other people come to the table and bring other perspectives and not your own.
Right.
Only your own.
And the implication is that by doing it in secret, there's no incentive to do that. You could just become in your own head, you could become the big science advisor that everyone wants to. Is that the...
Well, like, I just think, like, if you have a relationship with a policymaker, let's say, and then you have a private conversation with them, like, it's also your maybe moral responsibility to not only, like, put in your own beliefs, but also take others with you.
I see.
Like, have a more balanced approach.
Yeah, makes sense. Whereas if you're doing it in public, it wouldn't be so much on you because anybody could chip in. But if it's just on you, that makes sense. Great.
But there are sometimes matter of public national security. So, for example, you make a chip. You find inside the chip there is a thing that actually is spying. So you need to make sure that none of the policymakers or like politicians are using phones and so on that uses that. Like we had TikTok banned from Canada and US because it was spying on what was being said and so on.
Yeah.
So I think if you are someone who finds out something, that you have to have a channel to actually have a private conversation, because like, going to public and saying something like this could have disastrous impact on so many different levels of democracy too.
There are also policy areas where science advice is only useful if it's in private, perhaps. So, for instance, thinking about migration policy, where you may have well-meaning politicians who would love to take on board science advice, but they can't do it in public because the public debate just doesn't allow it. They would lose an election, they would fail. If they can do it in private and then work it into their thinking without having to say, to draw the connection of what's going on, maybe then they can start to make some changes. Emma?
Just a quick build on that. One, I think redaction could be an interesting play, not in the public. But
so you delete some of what was said from the public record?
But that certain people with security clearance would be able to use that information. Yeah. So there's an interesting way of tracking it. But also it's assuming that we live in a world where failure is not optional. That learning and asking stupid questions is unacceptable and shows weakness somehow.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if 10 years' time, those public discourses, and we were like, oh my God, I'm so glad that my politician asked that really stupid question, and it was celebrated. Like, that would be a wonderful world to see. So I can imagine that kind of thing could essentially change.
And you said 10 years?
I'm being optimistic.
10 years. You start counting out. Adam, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was thinking along those same lines, and I kind of agree, but I was thinking some places like the transparency is not that high and science communication is not that clear. So some politicians in maybe not so democratic places, they don't use science that doesn't agree with them. So maybe having like a private conversation is one way of getting like maybe some of the science that is kind of not with the flow to some important policymakers, and also like on maybe like high security issues. Like I come from the Middle East, and like water is a high securitized issue. So if you're saying anything slightly negative, it will be censored and it can cause some problems. So maybe in a private conversation, will have more of an impact.
Very good. We need to move on. We've done 3 questions at a time. We need to go a little bit quicker. Yay! As a science advisor, I should present only the evidence. Interpreting that evidence is the policymaker's job. So you could interpret the word interpreting how you like, but it could be, for instance, about whether you go on to make concrete policy recommendations, whether you try to explain to the policymaker what the evidence means, like what they should do about it, anything around that kind of area. So if you agree that presenting the evidence is your job and interpreting it is not your job, then you're going to shake the barrel. If you disagree, which maybe means that you think interpretation is also on the scientist, you're going to shake the shakers, and of course, there's always the third option. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, we have a no. We have a no to this one. We have 2 people saying no, and we have 1 person who wants to say something more interesting. So tell us why you disagree, Torsten.
Yeah, interpreting, I would say, is providing information on the options. So the kind of what if.
Okay.
If you choose that path, that will happen, and according to scientific advice. So I would say this is part of the scientist's job or the advisor's job.
Okay, great, thank you. And Vibraslap, you Vibraslapped, I think?
Yeah, I did. I think a science advisor should kind of work with a science comms professional to help interpret the evidence, and that makes the policymaker's job a bit easier to more quickly turn it into, into action.
Great. And anything to add, Peter? You're also your shaker.
I was a shaker.
Yeah.
I disagree. I believe it's the scientist's job to interpret the evidence, and that is working with the science communicator. We force them to develop the recommendations or the options. Then it's the policymaker's job to decide what to do, to agree to pursue a policy in this direction or that direction. But once they have the evidence interpreted, that's where the policymaker's job starts.
Yeah, okay. So this is, we have a consensus in the room, it seems, towards this idea of like options so that the policymaker can understand what they're deciding, but they still make the decision. Does anybody want to contribute anything else on this? Yeah, Connie.
I would say not only evidence is important, but providing your message for the evidence is important so that it is not misinterpreted.
Okay, so say a bit more about what that would mean. What would you do then?
So say you have evidence for your project A, and then you have that evidence, you want to say this is my message for that project, so that you want to be nice and clear about it so that the policymaker doesn't interpret what you said in the evidence as B or something like that.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
the message needs to be clear.
I see. Yeah, so it's about the clarity of communication of the evidence. Yes. Okay, but it's not necessarily about going further. It's not about, okay. Was it more, Linda?
I think if we look at today's world, it's quite difficult to see that only presenting or synthesizing or providing a summary of the research evidence is enough. Like, we have rapidly emerging crises that also like researchers' expertise is needed to respond to those in policymaking. So I think there is researchers' role in those kind of situations could be that they, comment on based on their expertise or based on the research evidence, kind of their expert evaluations of what is happening or assessments, what they think that is needed. So I think that is a really valuable role that researchers can play. But it's, of course, then there needs to be transparency in that. That's the role that they're taking.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Maggie, then Torsten, then we move on.
Quickly, who would be the person who would ring the bell and say, agree strongly?
Well, I think, so, I mean, I can try and answer that, but we didn't have any bell ringers, unless there's anybody who now wants to stand up to Maggie and say, me.
Or just describe who that...
Yeah, sure. So I think this is a view that's often heard from policymakers. Often. Sometimes hears from policymakers. And say, look, my job is to take all these various considerations into account, not just the science, but also the economics, the political feasibility, the social feasibility, my job's on the line and so on, and balance all those things, and then I will try to come to the interpretation of what I should do about it. It's not for you to say, here's all the evidence, and by the way, this shows that you should probably go for option A, or that if you go for A, this will happen, and B, that will happen. Because it's not holistic enough at that point. I think that's the argument we sometimes hear. Torsten.
Yeah, I would say that the role of science and we as science advisors is also to inform the discourse, public discourse on a topic. And maybe there's even a moral obligation of scientists to believe of relatively well-informed people on a certain topic, actually to also enter this discourse with interpretation. Otherwise, it's left to lobbyists, to journalists, and so on.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Question 4. It's my duty as a scientist to lobby for changes in society based on the evidence as I see it. If you agree, you're going to ring the bell. If you disagree, you're going to shake the shaker. You can pick your favourite kind of policy example here, that the idea is, should you be getting involved in the political lobbying? Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, Carolina, why did you blow the duck whistle?
Because I think it depends on the change in society. Is it for the better? Sure. Is it for the worse? No.
And who makes the call?
I suppose it's the scientist based on his values and her values. So
Okay.
it is subjective, but I don't think it's an answer or yes or no. I think it depends on, does that change affect society in a way that you think is to make it worse? You should be quiet.
Interesting.
Not be quiet, but not loud.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you're not ruling out the idea of lobbying. You're just saying that you should only do it when you see a positive outcome to it. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Martin, you shake the bell, so you said yes.
Yeah, interesting. I'm thinking about that argument because I think the decision if something is good and positive or negative is highly individual. So I think everyone here would say, hey, fighting climate change is a pretty good idea. There are people that have an opposite opinion, I think, and so I'm thinking about if it's okay to have an opinion and act on that opinion, but I think everyone will do that automatically. So sorry, those were my internal thinkings right now. So I said yes, because I think if I have evidence for something and I see that society is acting in a different way, I have some sort of obligation and duty to address that and also communicate that and engage. But that's also my individual opinion about my own research. So I'm totally fine with different researchers having different opinions and acting differently.
Okay, good. Lala, do you want to add anything?
I think it depends on what you're doing. And also, duty is too big of a word. It's nobody's duty to lobby, as a scientist, it's everyone's duty to make changes better for the better in society. But if I'm doing something that just really doesn't relate to society, then as a scientist, I don't have to like solving fairness theory.
Sure. Okay, but then that's the cop-out answer. Then the question doesn't arise, right? The controversy comes when the question does arise. I'm a scientist. I see the world in a particular way. It's my opinion. These things need to change particularly, but that's a politically contentious opinion. Should I be going out and making that case? I guess that's the question. You don't have to answer something. Peter, do you have a view?
I think a scientist needs to decide his or her motivations, if you like, if their research is giving them evidence in a particular direction. They should feel empowered, if you like, to become a lobbyist. Like stand up for whether save the honeybees or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
The alternative is to maybe keep a little bit quiet, but raise the issue with a scientific society, an academy of science, or whatever, and say, listen, we've got a problem here. We need to discuss this as a science-based society, not just me. And we need to synthesize the evidence, and then we can present our independent review and so work that way.
Right.
Can I bring some addition to where I was coming from?
Of course.
As a woman in science and someone who is an immigrant, a lot of the times, like people like me are marginalized. It is really hard to lobby for something that you see wrong if you are coming from a marginalized group. So that's why my problem was with the word duty.
I see.
Because it is and then once you lobby, you're just put in that corner that you should always work on women for science. Well, I'm a scientist first, then, so it shouldn't be my duty to always lobby. It should be something I do and then also be rewarded for.
Yeah.
But then for marginalized groups, that doesn't happen.
So I'm totally with you. So I think that the word duty is pretty good here because if you look at climate change, we have 99% of all researchers say climate change is made by humans and it's dangerous. And so I don't see enough scientists standing up and saying, hey, this is a real danger. And that's why in society we are still not fighting enough against the climate change and to change our policy. And I think so. I'm with you that sometimes it's hard, and I'm totally fine with some people doing more or less. But I think not saying it's a duty of a scientist to step up against, against bullshit. I think it's a duty. So, but maybe I totally respect that some people can do more, and some have other things, also personal issues, for example, and it's totally fine to step back a little. Still, I would say we have the duty to fight anti-scientist movements.
Yeah. Well, we take one more contribution and we must move on. So let's go with Emma.
I really liked you said we a minute ago. I think being reductive to the point that your duty as a singular scientist, if you level that up to a community of science and what individuals have to do to get to the point where a community is activated, I think at that point there is a duty to communicate all of your evidence, etc., etc. But the duty of one scientist, there are, like I said, so many barriers that they can stop in that.
Yeah.
It's a bit heavy.
Yeah. Maybe it's our duty as a society to empower people who would otherwise not be able to do that to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Good. Thank you. Question 5. I can't remember this. If a policymaker wants a simple answer from science, I should give them one. You get very different answers when the room's full of scientists, when the room's full of policymakers, incidentally. If you agree that a simple answer should be a policymaker should have if they want to, you shake the bell. If you disagree, you shake the shaker. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we have a good mix. The one who shook the bell, Carolina.
Maybe that's what they can understand. That's the best they can do, and that's.
Yeah, very good. Somebody else with a bell? Auntie?
Yeah, I strongly believe in the kind of way of thinking, like, explain to me like I'm 5 first. After that, you can adopt more knowledge about it. But like, if you first give a complicated answer that the policymaker or any person in general can't understand or gets bored while listening or elucidate, then I don't think it's of any use. You can build build knowledge step by step, and maybe the simple answer is the perfect first step.
Let's look at the other side of the argument then. Maggie.
I don't think you should give a simple answer. I think you should give a clear and understandable answer. So it can be intelligent and clear without being simplified.
And that's always possible, even.
I think we have to make it possible.
Hey, can I also add this? While giving the simple answer, also tell them, hey, this is a simple answer, and the reality is more complicated than this. Yeah, and then you can say that.
Yeah, excellent. Emma, you also shook a shaker?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Maggie. And also, I think there's a quite a heavy thing. If you want a simple answer, I think if he needs a simple answer to be able to communicate it, then that individual should strive to get it. But if you just want one for simplicity of communicating it, it just kind of implies that it's an immediacy there, rather than what he was saying in terms of education.
Yeah, makes sense. And then our Vibrosaka comes.
Yeah, so I totally agree. There needs to be not only a clear answer if they want something simple, but for example, if there was something communicated in plain language that they can understand, and that is also very important in the first place, so that they don't have to say, I want a simple answer. So maybe perhaps communicating the language that everyone understands. Everyone understands.
Yeah, makes sense. The worry I have about this is that, so it would be great if I agree with you, Maggie, that it was always possible, or we could always make it possible to represent the science fairly and clearly and intelligently, without taking out the complexity. I would be delighted. But I think it's not just about conceptually being able to do that in a few sentences or whatever. It's also about being able to do it in a way that the policymaker can use if they're about to go on the floor of Parliament and have a political debate with their opponent, or in a way that they have time to get their head around, because time isn't always on the side either. This is what worries me a little bit about this. That if you say, we must always be faithful to the complexity of science and just get better at making that work, I'm not sure I totally see that that's always going to be possible. But I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that, or Maggie, you can perhaps come back. No.
My question is with the word simple.
Okay.
And maybe I don't like the word simple. I like the word understandable, useful. But simple feels reductive.
I know.
Which is a simple answer better than no answer. Then the policymaker will go elsewhere for the answer that he or she is seeking.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah. Good. Next question. When there isn't enough data for a robust evidence-based answer, I should give my best guess. This is me as a science advisor, right? As a scientist. If you agree, ring the bell. If you disagree, shake the shaker. That's a good option. No one's brought out the wood kitchen yet. I'm looking forward to that. 3, 2, 1. All right. A big mix, a big old mix. Janet, why did you ring the bell? You agree?
Well, I don't know that there's ever enough data to ever know anything.
So you always have to do some bit of saying what is the best thing that you can do at this point.
Yeah. So this idea of would you phrase it as giving your best guess?
Well, I don't really like the word guess. It's an informed guess, I guess. It's informed in the sense it's most likely this way. Mm-hmm. And so this is what I know right now.
Very good. Tostin?
Yeah, basically along the same lines, we'll hardly ever be in a place where we know with absolute certainty about the scientific situation. But then we do a best guess, an informed best guess, but at the same time also communicate how shaky the ground is. This uncertainty.
So you communicate the uncertainty as well as the...
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Lisa, you shook a shaker? Yeah, okay, why?
Well, I guess, I don't know, this is a hard question, but I think I disagreed because I also didn't like the word guess. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to communicate well. So actually what the others were saying too, and I did a bit of a project on science communication during COVID. and what a bit of a shitstorm it was, and also how a lot of different politicians were communicating but not being clear enough about the uncertainty, about like, this is what we're trying to do now, and we're moving from here. And a lot of people were like, this is for sure, and we're going to do this because this is what science said. But there were changes all throughout COVID, and it made everyone very uncertain, afraid, and then people stopped believing in science, and even in a certain way, because they were like, well, no one knows what's happening. So the clarity for communication and not and saying like, this is what's happening now, and this is why, and this is at this stage. And I think so that's why I disagreed, because I didn't like the word guess. It's not about guessing. It's just about informing the better.
Very good. Thanks for earning us the explicit label on Apple Podcast, by the way. I appreciate it. Peter, you also have the shaker. You disagree?
Pretty much the same as Lisa. The word guess is a big no-no.
Yeah.
But it's, if you have synthesized the evidence and there are so many uncertainties in that evidence, that therefore needs to be communicated. When the percentage possibilities or whatever it is are relatively understandable, I think. But I guess it's a no.
No. Auntie, I will ask you in a second, but I just want to put one more question out for anybody else who'd like to answer it. Do you think there is a level of uncertainty, a level of certainty so low that you might be tempted to say yes otherwise, but you start saying no. Like below this level, when there's so little data, you should keep your mouth shut. Or do you think that the level of uncertainty changes, but as long as you're clear about it, you can still try and make a guess? Just a question. Anyway, Auntie, you wanted to...
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that instead of guess, approximation or estimation.
Yeah, sure. Colin?
Or if there is enough historical data, for example, you might be able to say, here's my extrapolation or forecast, and that would be a better form than guess. There should technically be enough, hopefully, for that.
Yeah.
So that's just based on context.
That's interesting. Yeah, we saw that early in COVID when you're saying don't go outside, closing all the children's playgrounds and stuff, right? Because the idea was, and school, right? The idea was like, of course, we know from past pandemics this is a really big risk, and that then nuanced and changed over science. Janet.
So I think about when I'm doing research, I like to replicate my findings. So if I've only done one study and haven't replicated it, then I don't want to communicate it.
Yeah. Very good. We must move on. Question 7, please. When scientists disagree on a controversial issue, I should present my own view on what the evidence says. Again, this is as a science advisor. So if you agree that you should or may present your own view on the evidence when there is a controversy within science, you ring bell. If you disagree, you shake the shaker. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, we had a lot of people not sure what to say about this one, possibly including Connie. Connie, why did you vibe slap?
I vibe slap because it's not only about presenting my own view, but yes, you should say it, but also acknowledge the other controversial view. So I would first listen to what the other person has to say, what they have to present, and then I would say, okay, well, here's what I think and why, and support it. So that's kind of, it's a bit of a test.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I love it.
I think it's always good to have more perspectives.
Anybody else want to make a comment on this? Yeah, Martin.
So I found it pretty good. There's a concept that when people disagree, that each party tries to explain the opposite party's ideas and views to better understand and to better indulge. So you're not saying, hey, this is the enemy, and I'm completely against what this person or this group is saying, but to more understand where they're coming from and why their view is what it is. So, but I'm not sure if I should present that then, and to whom it's a question. So, I'm completely unsure. That's why I did not take an instrument. But I think it's a good idea to better understand what other views people have when there's a controversial issue.
Very good. Before we okay, Linda.
Yeah, I think in the context of science advice, it's really important to be transparent about the controversy. So communicating, okay, this is where there is controversy among scientists. So I think that's really important. I would communicate that first, then communicating then my own evidence. So kind of saying that there is uncertainty about this issue and kind of maybe like try to explain why there is certain controversy in the topic. So I like that first.
Very good. Yes, Torsten.
Yeah, there's a bit of a red flag also about communicating controversies in the climate change debate, where there's this kind of 99.9% agreeing it's man-made and so on, and there's this 0.1. And for a long time, media, I don't know about science policy advisors, but media then try to have both camps heard, and that's presented a terribly imbalanced picture of the reality.
Yes.
So I absolutely agree with you, and I think there is like value in saying that there is this percentage of so the majority thinks this, and there is like some uncertainty on this specific issue. So 100% agree with what you said.
Wonderful. We have to move on. If the politicians make a decision which really goes against my advice, it's my duty to speak out publicly against it. I've done an interview on the podcast where 2 people had a stand-up row about this. It was great. Okay, so if you agree, you have a duty to speak out publicly when the politicians go against your advice. You ring the bell. If you disagree, you shake the shaker. 3, 2, 1. Okay, yeah. After you change your mind, so was this a change of mind, or you just pick up the wrong thing?
No, I picked up the wrong thing.
Okay, so why do you say yes? Why do you agree that it's your duty to speak up?
I mean, it's a clear case. It's a clear case. The position has picked up or misinterpreted the message, and especially if it's on purpose, things like that. Then I personally, I would feel like it's my duty to definitely print that out.
Yeah, very good. Someone who said no. Peter, you said no.
Yeah, exactly. I think we touched on it before. We say policy making is a very complicated arena. There is the economics, the other lobbyists, keeping your constituents happy in your seat in parliament, and maybe the policymaker weighing all that up. I just can't promote genetically engineered crops or something like this. We've seen that happen. Yeah, maybe it's my duty to go back to the policy. You're always wrong. Why did you do this? To speak out publicly, I would be a little worried.
Why?
Just to protect yourself even.
Okay.
Just to be able to go back and we talked about trust as well. You want to be able to go back to that policymaker, one-to-one basis again another time, and if you've spoken up against him or her, then you're going to lose that trust.
Very good. And one more person who stood up and would like to contribute anything?
Can we change the my duty to our duty?
Why?
Based on the question number 8.
Okay, so to make it about the communities, scientific community's duty. Yeah, sure. Okay, interesting.
I think policymakers are equally or scientific advice to be held accountable, so they should be forced to explain why they go to scientific.
Right, so we build a system in which this essentially can't happen. Obviously, if it does, they have to say, and I ignore it, and here's the reason. Yeah. Very good. We have question 10. As a science advisor, I should try to present different stakeholder positions, such as those of affected communities. So you can agree with the bell, you can disagree with the shaker. This is the last question. If you've been itching to get your voice in the podcast but haven't yet said anything, now's your chance. 3, 2, 1, go. We have a yes, we have a no, and we have a duck. Yes, Lisa.
I don't know, but maybe I think I alluded to this before. But I'm new to academia, I'm new to science, and I'm one of those people that's all about collaboration and bringing stakeholders together. So that would be my own moral guide, would be to bring other people's voices, not just my own. So that's why I said agree.
Yeah, great. Martin?
So I would say if it's part of your research that you're engaging with stakeholders, then it's totally fine. But I would say you're a science advisor, so stick to the science, stick to the research. Politicians ask you, hopefully, about your position as a scientist, and so you should give an answer as a scientist. And it must not be as affected communities, but it might be if it's part of the research.
Excellent, thank you. And Carolina, you quite.
Yeah, I think
It's very complex. I think as a scientist, scientists should take affected communities in their research, questions and design and consideration, etc. So if they do that when they speak their science, they will be already implying affected communities within that result. But the way that the question is phrased, it seems like they're speaking on behalf of someone else. And it's really difficult to do that properly. And obviously, it's the policymaker who should be asking for more contribution. But I think it's very obvious speaking on the same else not coming that those communities should have a say in this.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much indeed. We are out of time. We've been sitting in this room where we closed all the curtains and windows in order to protect the sound quality for quite long enough. Thank you very much for your patience at the start. We've run over by 5 minutes, but we started like 20 minutes late, so I'm really grateful that you stuck around. I need to say on tape, thank you to SRA Congress for the invitation and for making this possible, and to the University of Helsinki for hosting. I also need to say on tape, thank you to the podcast first superfan, who is not in the room right now, but Monica Bauer from IASA, who's taken it on herself not only to become the first superfan of the whole podcast, but also to like shill this podcast to literally everybody she meets, which is a lot of people. So thank you, Monica. And she's the first owner of the coveted Science and Policy Podcast merch. If you would like to grab a t-shirt from the table on your way out, you're most welcome to. And thank you, all of you, for coming. Let's do the name thing again. Who are you?
Anna.
Isaac. Aggie. Emma.
Eva. Torsten.
Nale.
Anna.
Janet.
Linda.
Julia.
Connie. Carolina. Lisa.
And Martin.
Yeah! And one person had to sneak out just before the end, and so it's on the listener to figure out who was missing at the end, who was mentioned at the beginning. You're wonderful. Last but not least, I want to thank our noble army of listeners out in the world, without whom I would never have bothered making 100 episodes of this podcast. I mean, I was going to stop at 6, that was the original plan. So thank you for listening, and please keep spreading the word. And see you in 2 weeks for an episode which will not feature any noisy wildlife. And then I guess in 4 years more for episode number 200. Say bye. Thank you so much. That was really good. Thank you.
The Science for Policy podcast is created by the Scientific Advice Mechanism to the European Commission. It's produced and presented by Toby Wardman, with additional editing by Nina Skorczak. The Scientific Advice Mechanism provides evidence-based expertise and policy recommendations to inform policymaking in the European Commission. This podcast is funded by the EU via the SAPEA Consortium. Our theme music is composed by Carlo Alfredo Piatti and performed by Elisaveta Shushenko.